In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in Black and White emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our world.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I want you to think about something tonight. I want you to think about a child. Doesn't matter where you're from, just thinking about a child in a classroom in this country. They're sitting there. They've got their pencil. They've got their notebook, and somewhere deep inside them is a fire, curiosity, ambition, the raw material of brilliance, and the system they're sitting inside of right now is quietly, systematically putting that fire out. That is not a metaphor. That is a documented pattern. It is happening in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. It is happening in Mount Vernon, New York. It is happening in Jacksonville, Arkansas. It is happening in classrooms across New Jersey, across the South, across every urban corridor in this nation. And it is happening most viciously, most precisely to the Black children, brown children, immigrant children, and the children whose only crime is being born into communities that the education system decided weren't worth fully funding, fully staffing, or fully seeing. Tonight on American Black and White, we're not here to debate whether the system is broken. That debate is over. The data is settled in, the dissertation settled it, the lived experiences of millions of families settled it. We're here tonight to ask the harder question. What do we build in its place? And who do we trust to lead that conversation? Tonight, we trust three of the most formidable minds in American education. We have with us Dr. Samuel Coleman, Assistant Superintendent of Instruction for the Oshkosh Area School District in Wisconsin, co-founder of Read More Oshkosh, a Harvard scholar, a literacy advocate, and a man who has spent his career building doors in rooms that were never designed to include him. We have Dr. Jonathan Brown, a former principal of Longfellow Middle School in the Mount Vernon City School District in New York, and the author of the groundbreaking research that proves the fate of a child's educational journey can often be tracked as early as the sixth grade. He calls it the Keystone Grade. Tonight, he'll explain why. And we have Troy Long, CTE County Director in New Jersey, national keynote speaker, and the author of the CTE Experience, The Hook Urban Education Needs, a man who believes that he has proven that what urban education needs is not another reform, it needs relevance. These three individuals represent what it looks like when educators refuse to accept a broken as normal. And tonight, they're going to speak out. This is American Black and White Special Edition, August 31st, Season 4, Episode 138. Let's get into it and let's bring our people to the stage. Oh, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Here.
Hey, so if each of you can give a brief introduction of yourself before we get into the show, I would definitely appreciate it. But I also like to tell you guys that Dr. Shakir Spielman is not here today because his wife just went into labor.
Oh.
So let's start with you, Dr. Brown. If you could give us a brief introduction about yourself, I would definitely appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. King. For those of you who don't know, I'm Jonathan Brown, the Chief Academic Officer of Catalyst Education, a groundbreaking consulting group looking to make a difference in the lives of all children. I've been a deputy superintendent, assistant superintendent, a principal, assistant principal, chairperson, teacher, chapter rep at the UFT, and everything in between. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Dr. Coleman, if you could give us an introduction about you.
Honored to be here tonight. I currently serve as the assistant superintendent for a school district in Wisconsin, the Oshkosh Area School District. As mentioned in the introduction, my passion lies at understanding how literacy and career and technical education is a gateway or not to opportunity here in our nation. And I'm a proud native of the city of Milwaukee, so shout out to Milwaukee. And my commitment lies at making sure that every student in the systems that I serve in or that I'm affiliated with honors the educational right and opportunity that every student has a birthright to.
And Mr. Long, if you could give us a description and an addition to who you are.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Troy Long. I'm the Director of CTE and Grants Administration at Mercer County Technical Schools. That's right near Trenton, New Jersey, the capital. And like my passion is CTE, everything I do. I was a CTE student, teacher, administrator now, director, and I do a lot of other things with CTE. I truly believe that CTE makes education relevant for our inner city students, and that is the key, and that's why I call it in my book the hook that urban education needs, because most of the time in the inner city our students do not lack intelligence, they lack interest. So we need to make sure they're interested in what they're doing so that you could get the best out of them.
I thank you guys for those introductions, and I'd just like to start out and just say, as we get into this show tonight, I think each of you guys have a special, unique part of what you have contributed to the education system. And we know that there's an enormous amount of things going on with climate here in the country where we're still trying to make education be about as best as it can be. To just start out in this manner, let me just ask a question for each of you, if you could give us your opinion. As you look at the different school systems and the school systems that you're working in right now, what are some of the things that can improve to make those systems that much better for all of your students, including those of the underserved and marginalized communities? Let's start with you, Dr. Brown.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. If school districts made every decision around the best interest of children, that would be the first and most important change that could be made in our public education system. Too often, decisions are made about what's convenient for adults or what's politically expedient, with very little conversation about how decisions will affect children as it sits. So I would just begin with focusing on children in every decision.
Dr. Coleman?
I often talk about education and our work as educational justice work. And so I think if we position ourselves as educational justice warriors or advocates, we work from a place where we acknowledge that there's an injustice that persists in our education system, and that every single day we are working to eradicate and overcome injustice that's often directly tied to education and education outcomes. So that would be my stance, that we use education as a lever for justice. And when I'm talking about justice, I mean economic justice, access justice, justice and civic engagement, literacy justice, justice to be recognized and respected with human dignity in every aspect of life.
Mr. Long.
And with relevance, a lot of times students don't know why they're learning something or how it relates to their day-to-day life. We need to incorporate that in all content areas so they can know why they're learning this English, why they're learning this math, et cetera, et cetera. And they don't do that. And because they don't do that, they don't see a reason for it. Like, well, I'm not going to do this after I get out of school, so I don't care. So they need to make sure they make them understand why this is relevant to their day-to-day life outside of school.
Dr. Coleman, when did you know that education was not just a career path for you, but a calling? Was there a specific moment, a teacher, a book, a conversation that made the mission click into place?
Yeah, it was very on. It was actually in my first year serving in education. I was a paraprofessional or teacher assistant, and I was assigned the bad kids. And for me, my awareness at that point was, and I was making I think $10 an hour at that time. But I knew that certainly I could have gone anywhere else and made more money. But what I was more interested in was making a difference in the city where I served. And so for me at that point, I decided that the amount of money that I made or the prestige or whatever that would come with the career was not important to me at all. It was making an impact and making a difference in the lives of young people, especially in the city of Milwaukee. So at 21 years old, as a paraprofessional, that revelation was clear to me.
Mr. Long, you were a CTE student before you were a CTE teacher, department chair, vice principal, or county director. Take us back to that student. What was the school like for you before CTE, and what changed when you found it?
School was actually boring. Like I tell everyone, I never took my book bag home. I was in the honors classes. I was smart enough to listen to you and figure it out, so I could pass the test. I could do all of those type of things, but I never did homework, et cetera, et cetera. So I was just an average student in terms of the overall grades. But it didn't push me. It didn't engage me. So I just did what I had to do, so my mom wouldn't be mad, and I didn't want to hear him out. So I mean, that's just being brutally honest, and I tell her that, and I also tell her thank you for pushing me once I found my direction. But once I got into 11th, 12th grade, and I was put into those classes where I had the opportunity to chase my passions, I excel. I started going. I was happy because number one, they let me get out of school and go work and do something that really made sense to me. So that right there, that little bit, just finding that niche that was, that impacted me, that meant something to me, got me more engaged in the overall learning process.
Dr. Brown, you examined 21 sixth grade schools across Westchester County and arrived at a concept, the Keystone grade. For our audience who may not be familiar with the archway metaphor, what is a keystone and why is sixth grade the exact grade you are describing?
If you can picture an overpass on a highway made out of stone, the keystone is the stone that sits in the center that holds everything else together. And if you look at a student's trajectory, K through 12, sixth grade sits right in the middle. So literally it's in the center, but metaphorically it's in the center as well when it comes to turning into positive outcomes for students. What we found is that by sixth grade, you can clearly identify who is likely to graduate from high school and who is less likely based upon whether they've been suspended, whether they've missed 10% or more of the days, or even if they failed just one class. If by looking at sixth grade, you can begin to understand what is necessary for students to succeed 7 through 12, and it's your last best chance to take any at-risk student and get them on track.
So when we think about sixth grade, especially from the perspective of your research and your work, and you say it's right dead in the middle, is it at that point that you're saying that this is where you get to learn where the kid is going to pass or fail or what their life could look like? And if so, how can you, or what did you come up with that could make that better and easier?
So very rarely will a student struggle up to sixth grade and then snap their fingers and turn it on for 7 through 12. Mr. Long mentioned before that he was an honor student. I'm pretty sure he was identified earlier in his life, though he may not have lived up to that potential, similar to myself. Students who are academically talented are usually identified early. The reason why is that those dispositions and behaviors are established early, and those are those behaviors that lead you to success in grades 7 through 12. What I found is that schools were not intentionally teaching those behaviors and those skills that allow students to succeed in grades 7 through 12, and we're leaving it to chance whether students were successful or not. One concrete area where school districts were making an effort was in ninth grade with ninth grade academies, which became popular in Chicago. But ninth grade is literally too late to turn a student into an academic scholar if they have not had appropriate preparation beginning no later than sixth grade.
So, Dr. Coleman, after listening to what Dr. Brown just said and the work that you have done, How does this coordinate or fit into the work that you have done with your students?
Yeah, beautifully. So, as you know, I recently published an op-ed with the University of Chicago's Public Policy Institute describing the intersection between career and technical education and literacy instruction, and how students are often forced into or expected to pick a path that would take them toward academia or access to post-secondary collegiate opportunity or entering directly into the workforce. And what I talk about is I think students need to have strong literacy skills that would give them access, and they need technical skills so that if they chose to go directly into the workforce, or if they want to make money while they're paying, regardless of what they want to do with their professional, I don't think that students should be thought about as a CTE student or you're college bound. I think we all should be ready to work with our minds and work with our hands. And so I think what my colleagues are describing, I think intersect beautifully. And that's the work that I do with articulating and promoting the intersection between career and technical education and making sure that students have an option to pursue post-secondary education should that be their choice.
Mr. Long, you know, and as the CTE director there in New Jersey, and I think the work that you've done has been astonishing. And just thinking about a foundational purpose of and how you want to look at a framework. When you think about what Dr. Brown is saying, as well as what Dr. Coleman is saying, and what you do with your students, and what happens a lot, I'm assuming, with the CTE program, is that you're being hands-on and teaching the skill sets that you guys teach. How does your foundation stand as a solid foundation for those students that they're speaking of to stand on, to grow, and to expand?
Well, it hits multiple points. Number one, to speak to what Dr. Coleman was talking about with the educational piece and the literacy piece, you know, with the Perkins 5 initiative, we are now forced to make sure we do articulation agreements with colleges. So we're pushing college heavily. So even in the trades, we're pushing college credits. So you may be getting your hands dirty, so to speak, but we're also trying to ensure you get college credit. So I have a lot of articulation agreements set up. So for instance, I got a welding program. My welding kids get 44 credits articulated through Thomas Edison State University, a local school in New Jersey. But the point is, that's how we're trying to cover all avenues, so to speak. So we don't want it just to be, you know, if you look at it back in the day, it was the vocational, it was the kids that wasn't going to college, go CTE. Then we push them, you know, so for 30 years it was college readiness instead of college and career readiness. So that is the mindset that we got to have. We got to prepare them overall with the soft skills. We have to embed everything into that student. And it's not just about, you know, them doing a CTE pathway. It's so much more than that. We want to make sure they get credentials. We want them to have everything humanly possible to go out there and make a living wage. And that's the key right now, because the price of everything is going up. But CTE students are making money. So we want to make sure they have all the tools necessary to make the money, to be able to articulate themselves, to be able to do everything that's needed of them to move forward in life, either if that's college or career at 18, but they have the option to do both.
Dr. Coleman, James Baldwin and Fred Hampton are among your most cited inspirational figures.
Yes.
How do two figures who are associated primarily with writing and political activism inform the work of an assistant superintendent running a school district in Wisconsin?
Yeah, I think both Baldwin and Hampton focused on community. When James Baldwin, for example, in his book Fire Next Time, he critiqued and talked about the community and the environment that his nephew was being brought up in. Fred Hampton critiqued the community and said the government is not going to save us. We have to save ourselves. We have to take ownership of our community, and we will keep each other safe. We'll make sure that we have the resources necessary for access to food, nutrition during the school day, but also during the summer and on the weekends. So both Baldwin and Hampton had an emphasis on building community, critiquing community, but also acknowledging the assets in communities. And something you talked about and your opening was around how do we create something different. And I think both had a perspective of it's not sufficient to just critique the community or critique the cities in which we're situated. We have to be able to put the work in to build something better because nobody else is coming to build it. So in my work, my stance is we, as we used to say, we all we got. So we have to build what we want. And if we're not happy or satisfied with what is, certainly it's appropriate to critique that, but it's inappropriate to stop at the critique. We have to be willing to build something better, something brighter, because our kids deserve it. And specifically Fred Hampton, at 20 something years old, very early on said, I'm not waiting until I'm respected as an elder in this community. The ideas that I have matter right now. And so for me, as a young school district, well, I still consider myself to be young. Kids think I'm old, but for me, it's like I'm not waiting to be legitimized after I reach a certain age. It's like the ideas that I have, the ideas that our kids have. It ain't even about me. The ideas that our kids have right now matter. And needs to be centered in building the spaces and building the communities and building the schools that work for them.
With those two personalities, because they are very, very strong in what they believe in and, in getting the word out to community. Mm-hmm. How are you able to use what they have done to connect with the students in the school district and where you are in Wisconsin? How does that work?
I think, first of all, making sure that students, particularly Black students, but really all students, that they know who Fred Hampton was and they know who James Baldwin was. Because unfortunately, in many schools across this nation, when kids are learning about Black history, there's a very narrow window of time, 15 days out of that school year. 15 of those days during the month of February are used, if even that, to talk about who contributed to the progress of our nation, particularly around racial justice. And often it's limited to individuals who students will learn about anyway, Rosa Parks, Dr. King, Frederick Douglass, so forth. So for me, it's making sure that we broaden who we talk about. And both James Baldwin and Fred Hampton are very controversial, if you will. And I'm using air quotes because I don't think they're controversial at all. But I think people are scared to talk about what they stood for because students will start asking questions, or they might say, that's a good idea. I think we need to be, that's the type of time we need to be. I'm trying to switch right now. I just got off work, but for lack of better words, like that's the type of time we need to be on, as the young people say, like that's what we need to be on right now. And I think that scares people if kids start talking about organizing or critiquing or accountability for the systems and the communities in which they live. So for me, my work is about teaching all students that accountability is not a bad word for them or for the people who are supposed to serve them and provide leadership in their communities. And they are not too young or too disenfranchised to be a builder for the communities or in the communities where they exist.
Dr. Brown, your dissertation found that the 16 characteristics of successful schools for young adolescents and interdependent, not independent, meaning pulling on one lever without the others, do not produce the same result. Why is that finding so significant, and how does it change the way we should think about school improvement efforts?
So there are 16 characteristics, as you mentioned, and they fall under 3 domains: curriculum, instruction, and assessment, culture and community, and leadership. And while people believe that leadership is important and culture and community are important, the findings were crystal clear. If you put your energies and efforts into curriculum, instruction, and assessment, you will produce higher outcomes for children. The reason why that's so important is that many initiatives happen far away from the classroom, with the purchase of programs, with the hiring of adults in certain roles, with mission statements and logo changes and things along those lines. But those are not the things that will ultimately change outcomes for children. What this means for school turnaround efforts is that there should be the provision of the appropriate resources necessary for schools to provide that quality instruction that we're looking for. You know, those 6 characteristics included things like valuing students, academic rigor, quality assessments, differentiation, and health and wellness. I think we would agree that all of those things are important. And when you take those 6 things and you prioritize them, you can move the needle. When I was the principal at Benjamin Turner Middle School in Mount Vernon, which was formerly Longfellow, we had 0 out of 20 points in terms of our growth score. 0. After we've added 6th grade and spent 2 years building it up, our growth score went to 16 out of 20. That wasn't that culture wasn't important or leadership wasn't important, but we made sure we put our money and our efforts where it mattered, in the classroom.
So with that, I mean, were you able to get start some changes as to how things were operating in the school system, or did you guys wait a while to try to interject anything new?
Well, I want to say this and not throw anybody under the bus. I have had tremendous success promoting student growth and a limited amount of support from superintendents, even though I've produced that growth. All right. So I just want to throw that out there that producing results is not enough to sustain those results. When I was the assistant superintendent in Philadelphia, Overbrook High School boasted a 23% increase in literacy scores from one year to the next. And part of what we were able to do is that when curriculum, instruction, and assessment are important, you must have the systems in place to support adult efficacy. You know, I use this statement, take care of the people that take care of our kids. Well, a lot of teachers are very skilled, but they're operating outside of systems that promote success. Having a strong instructional support team so that teachers can meet the needs of their individual students is critical. Having a strong instructional leadership team made up of all stakeholders in the community provides a perspective necessary and the buy-in to implement successful change. So those are a couple of things that should be considered when you're looking at what can make a difference for the lives of children.
Mr. Long, your career trajectory, CTE student, teacher, department chair, vice principal, county director, is a complete arc that was built inside one educational lane. Was that intentional from the beginning, or did CTE just keep being the thing that made the most sense at every stage?
It was intentional because education found me. I think I previously told you before, I did not go to school to be an educator. I got into education because I wanted to coach basketball. And all right, how do I coach basketball? Get the teacher, sir. I had a business degree, so I flipped that into teaching CTE. But once I got into education and I was a teacher, I started to see, hey, there's nobody like me that's in this realm, number one. And if I want to make some changes that directly impact kids, I got to keep moving up. So once I started to move up, I was like, okay, what's next? What's next? So I already planned this job out a long time ago. So this job is like 10 years in the making, but there's not a lot of these type of jobs because this is a specialty type of position where it's probably easier for me to be an assistant superintendent than it is to be the director of CTE because there's multiple assistant superintendents in huge districts. There's only one CTE person. And most of the time, they just give it to a person that don't have the background in CTE. I don't know if you gentlemen see that a lot, where you just, all right, I need a person to go there. We're going to tie CTE into social studies, this, that, and the third, and have them do the paperwork for it. But that's where you're hurting students at because you don't have a person that's passionate about it, that lived it and walked, that walked a mile in those shoes type of thing. So I'm really fortunate that this is something that saved me. So I wholeheartedly believe in it. So that's why I fight for my students and any student that's in CTE.
Dr. Colvin, if a curriculum director came to you tomorrow and said, our literacy scores are fine, we're meeting benchmarks, what would you say to them about what those benchmarks might be missing?
Yeah, I mean, first I would challenge them to disaggregate that data and look at, because I've been in school districts where, yeah, if you take the whole, of course, the district does appear to be, and usually the benchmark is, are you meeting the state average or not? And sometimes that's not even, like, that's not the bar for me. But then when you disaggregate that and see who's meeting literacy outcomes as far as proficiency or moving from proficiency to advanced, usually it's pretty clear who's being left out of that. And so I would, first of all, challenge that person to disaggregate the data and see if the growth or the meeting of benchmarks is consistent across students who receive special education services, students who receive language services, students who are Black, students who receive free and reduced lunch. Is that meeting of the benchmarks consistent across those groups? I would also say to that person that you probably either need to reframe your thinking or resign, because none of us in education should think that we've gotten to a place where we're fine. I think this work should require a persistent focus on progress. And I think the enemy of progress is assuming that we're good enough right now or things are just fine. And so we have to be focused on progress, even if this is a school system that's in the 99th percentile. Like, keep going, keep going, because your students deserve that. And so for me, I'm personally wired on, continuing my journey, continuing my pursuits, even if by other measures and standards we've arrived. And I don't believe we arrive until we are in the grave, or whatever form our remains are disposed of. So we haven't ever arrived. Like, we have to keep going. And so I would challenge that person to continue their pursuits.
If you don't mind, I would appreciate if you can tell us about your dissertation, your findings, why did you do the research that you did, and what was your finding results?
Yeah, so to that point around disaggregating the data, I was interested in school principals who were deliberately focused on increasing access to educational opportunity or educational justice in racially diverse contexts. So specifically looking at decreasing suspension, increasing participation in advanced placement courses, and increasing literacy outcomes based on proficiency. And so I studied principals who were effective at, I won't say closing gaps, because the gaps have not closed, but making progress toward increasing representation in the number of students who are proficient, particularly Black and Brown students who are proficient in literacy, who were participating in advanced placement courses, and who were spending more time in school because they were being suspended or removed from class less. Specifically, beyond just thinking about what strategies were they doing to be effective, I wanted to know what were they experiencing as they were doing that work. Because certainly when you start placing an emphasis on educational justice, there are going to be people who say that's not the right work, or we're just fine, or you're creating division, or this is a woke agenda, and all of that. So I wanted to know how are leaders persisting in environments where they're leading for educational justice and experiencing resistance, either from their board or from their communities or from their superintendents. And so what I found is leaders who personalized this work like it was a personal mission and not a professional mission, where they believed, I like your question earlier around how do we know we were called to this work? So it was the leaders who felt like they were called to do that work who were actually making a difference. It wasn't those who felt like I took a class and I got inspired about equity or diversity and inclusion, and through that inspiration decided to put some posters up on the wall and diversify the library and have a speaker come in and do professional development. But it was the people who lived this work around justice in their households, in their communities, and when they showed up to work. The other thing that I found is not one of those leaders who were leading that work did so without opposition or some form of resistance. And so the status quo, the pull of the status quo, is always usually stronger than the desire for improvement. And so, and that's why the status quo often pushes against or rises up when change or progress is introduced into the conversation, because you have a lot of people who are saying, is this going to require me to work more hours? Is this going to require me to do more? And so for me, it was looking at how are leaders persisting in those environments, because unfortunately, if leaders who are interested in educational justice and educational progress are not stronger than the status quo, they might be able to make a difference or make an impact for windows of time. But the moment they get pushed out or pulled out from that space, it snaps right back to what things were before. So we need leaders to be able to persist in these spaces long enough to shift culture and to shift mindsets. And so I wanted to understand what were leaders doing to persist. And what I found in that research is the principals who were doing this work to persist, they had a strong spiritual or faith grounding. And so when they reached those points of time where they felt like I could go somewhere else and do work that's easier, their belief values or their faith system or their spiritual affinities kept them in environments where they were doing hard work because they believed they were being inspired by or empowered by a source that was greater than what they had within themselves. Those were just two of the findings. There are more. I'm happy to share my dissertation, but Those were two of the findings. And I'll just say one more thing. What resonated with me about these leaders, and these weren't all Black leaders, this was a racially diverse group of leaders. What inspired me about that last finding is when I think about at the time when we had we had more Black and brown leaders, particularly Black leaders in the South before Brown versus Board of Education. And I don't have time to critique that right now. But most of the teachers and principals were also Sunday school teachers, or they were pastors, or they were missionaries, and they were evangelists. And so they had a strong spiritual foundation and believed that education was going to be the key. But beyond education, they believed that they were doing mission work. And so when you had your history teacher who was also the Sunday school teacher or the choir director or the preacher or the minister or the deacon, but they also served in public education. It gave different credibility and trust in those educational environments. And then certainly after the Brown versus Board of Education, we lost all of our Black teachers. And to this day, we're still trying to recover from that.
Right.
So can you tell us, does that work from what you found in your research to what you do now? Does it work hand in hand with restorative justice? If so, is that a positive or a negative?
I haven't thought about that before, but I think so. I think being able to persist, being able to draw inspiration from within or from beyond who we are as people. I think restorative justice suggests that, first of all, you need something to restore people to. And so the point of restorative justice that I think a lot of people overlook is there's a set of community values, norms, and expectations that are established and agreed upon by the stakeholders of that community. So if it's in a school or a classroom, as a classroom, there's a set of agreements saying, this is how we engage with each other. This is what we do when there's a transgression against these values or expectations. And this is how we take ownership for the space where we exist, going back to Fred Hampton, James Baldwin. And so when there's a transgression against those environments, we restore people back to, remember what we said. These are our values. This is what we stand for. This is what we're working to build. So I think in that regard, restorative justice certainly goes hand in hand, because there's a shared agreement and ownership over how we engage in this environment and what we're supposed to do to reach a certain goal. And when there's a transgression or a misstep in that space, we don't ban people from that environment. We don't kick them out. We don't say you don't deserve to be here. Instead, we say, again, remember what we agreed to. Take ownership for what you did that slowed us down or held us back, and commit to doing better going forward. You're forgiven. Now let's keep going. I think it goes hand in hand.
Mr. Long, your book exposes systemic barriers in urban education and offers an actionable framework for change. For the educator reading this who feels trapped inside a broken system, what is the most immediately actionable thing your framework tells them to do tomorrow morning?
Actionable things to do. That's interesting, because it's so many different ways I could go. Like I don't feel like I could pinpoint one way. And I'm saying that because there's so many different options. It kind of depends on the situation. So, but most of the situation is just the lack of knowledge, the lack of funding, is a lot of lacks there. But then when you do get those things taken care of, then it goes a step further. Like the infrastructure may not be in place in terms of the school. So everything kind of builds on like the certain situation that they're in. So it's really hard to kind of pinpoint that from like a blanket statement. Yes, I could say that. But for each individual school district, it's something different. So like I worked in a large school district, and I could say some of the easiest fixes was, like from the inside. Just like the curriculum wasn't aligning. We was wasting money on projects and programs that didn't give you any value added. So we could remove those things. A lot of the stuff we was doing wasn't proper. Like we was doing CTSOs outside of the classroom when it should be done inside of the classroom. Just a bunch of quick fixes that need to happen but that won't happen until you just take an overview of what's going on. Let's say, okay, these things are not happening that should be happening. How can we fix them? Because it costs no money to fix the stuff that's wrong. And that's what a lot of people don't understand when it comes to CTE. The majority of times is no money out of pocket for you to run these programs, and you will actually get money back once you start doing them the right way. So those type of things can fix and change any type of school system if they're doing it the right way. But 9 times out of 10, they're not, because the person who will handle it don't know what they don't know.
So would this be another form of not wanting to invest in the kids themselves, or what do you think that would be?
So I won't even say it's not wanting to invest in the kids. Like, we throw a lot of money at students, but we misguided with that. So and they have different agendas. So school system, they're looked at as, oh, what is my testing passing rate? So those type of things mean way more to them than it was, well, how many students I got into college, got jobs that can make a living wage. So they're not looking at it in the same lens that I'm looking at it, because they're worried about how they look for the state and things of that nature. They're not worried about the real student after the fact. Now, they may say, oh, I'm attracted kid, et cetera, but if you're setting the kid up and you're sending him to college, and that kid is not a college student, but just because you need to do that so you can say you did it. I like to use the phrase now, and this is and a lot of the times when I talk, we're setting them up for generational debt instead of generational wealth. And that's the problem when you don't, cater to the child and you're catering to the system.
Dr. Brown, your research established that the CIA cluster, curriculum, instruction, and assessment, had a statistically significant impact on student achievement, while the leadership and organization cluster did not show the same internal significance. That's a provocative finding for a principal to share. What do you make of that?
What I make of that is that education should always be about children, what they're learning, how they're learning it, and how we know whether they know it or not. When you look at culture and community, that's about how things happen. When you look at leadership, that's about a handful of adults. And that's not what school is about. Those things are important, but school has always been about what you're learning, how you're learning it, and how we know what you know. What I would encourage anyone who's thinking about producing positive outcomes for students is the results you're getting are the results you're designed to get. If your school is underperforming, it's because it's designed that way. If you are focusing appropriately on curriculum, instruction, and assessment, then you will have strong outcomes. It's been proven over and over again through my personal experiences and through the research. So we talked before about how there's leadership turnover. That negatively impacts what happens in classrooms because there's not a continuity of philosophy in delivering and making decisions in a school district. Sometimes you're better off having a mediocre superintendent stay 5 years than to keep looking for the unicorn that's going to lead your district to the promised land, so that some of these practices can stay in place. And so for anyone who's thinking about where to spend their time and energy, leadership is important. Culture and climate is important. But at the most important point of a student's career, the curriculum, instruction, and assessment will determine whether or not they are successful.
This question is for each of you guys, because based on what Dr. Brown just said, I want to ask each of you if you could just chime in. Can you tell me when or how do you know that you're starting to see those failures of what's going to be a negative impact on the school? When you see that, when do you try to change it, and how do you change it? Let's start with you, Dr. Brown.
I get in trouble a lot at work. That's how you change it. And I'm not going to be quiet about this. My superintendents would tell you I am not silent when it comes to doing what's in the best interest of children. And I have flat out rejected directions when they are not aligned with what we know works for children. I think it takes leaders with backbone. And Dr. Coleman was talking about perseverance. I have my scars. There's no doubt about it. But I'm able to persevere through them because my focus is on the children. And when you see children learning, when you see them entering the profession of education, when they come back and tell you about how a small decision ended up having a large impact on their life, those are the things that empower me to continue to deal with those who don't necessarily understand what it takes to be successful. I'm willing to get fired for what I believe in, and I've proven that throughout my career.
Dr. Dr. Coleman?
I from a district or systems perspective, I look for alignment, and unfortunately, the reality in many public education systems and networks of charter and private schools is there's a haves and haves not. There's just like, oh, I want to go to that school because that's the good school, and then all the rest of them are not. So for me, I look for where we should be aligned. What's working in the good school should be all of our school. We shouldn't have a good school and then the rest of them are the undesirables. And so for me, I look for is there an acceptance of this notion that one type of school or one side of town or one community is the desirable one, and then everything else, good luck to you. So for me, it's being able to find inconsistency or incoherence in that regard, and then certainly naming that, and then working to bring alignment to that, so that we don't have a tale of two cities where a train track or a river or a highway or a street or a zip code makes the difference between the quality of education that a child is getting or the expectation for the type of teachers and leaders who are showing up in those spaces. That would be my stance. I want communities and cities where that entire system works for every student in that environment, no matter what neighborhood they live in, or side of town they live on.
Mr. Long?
So I love what both panelists said. So like with Dr. Brown, I lived that exactly what you're going through. Like I fought so hard for my students. So I'll say equity in terms of that. Like what you're doing for your school, you need to be doing for my school. So I was in a district, we had like so many schools, and they would treat certain ones better than the others. And I always fought to make sure my kids had a seat at their table and they was getting the same amount. If you spending $10 at your school, you're gonna spend $10 at my school. Our kids deserve everything the same. So that was a big thing for me. And then to take it further, like Dr. Coleman was talking about. Hold on, this went blank. But when he was referring to, can you? I'm sorry, Dr. Coleman. I had it in my head. So we had specialty schools, and the specialty schools get treated differently. So and that's what you was talking about. And so we had it magnet and comprehensive. So I hated that the magnet got everything, the comprehensive didn't. And I will argue that the comprehensive teachers have to go above and beyond. They're more creative because they had to reach the disengaged students where the magnet had the students that was already self-motivated. So it wasn't hard to get the scores with those type of kids. It was harder to get the scores with the kids that had barriers to success, that had to, they didn't have a meal, that come from a broken home, et cetera, et cetera. And you got to motivate them and make them understand education. So those were the two things that really resonate with me.
Well, I got a comment here in the chat for you guys, and each of you can respond to this. This is from Brian Zion. I'm going to put it on the screen. He says, culturally responsive hiring is essential. When most educators don't reflect the students they teach, the disconnect becomes inevitable, and it drives many of the issues we see in schools today.
I mean, if I can jump in, I think I get that notion. I understand it, and I certainly believe that many, if not most, urban schools in this nation would like for their workforce to reflect the demographics of the students they teach and serve. As I also mentioned, it is systemic and institutional, and we can trace this right back to Brown versus the Board of Education to understand why we don't have a pool of educators we could draw from, so that our schools reflect the diversity, so that our workforce reflects the diversity of the student population they serve. So when we look at who's going into educator licensing programs, who's in our grad schools of education, I teach in our graduate schools of education, and it is very clear to me that we have more work to do to make sure that we are from early on. And I think this is a part of a career and technical education focus as well that I prioritize, and many other districts do as well. We need students to be able to see themselves as teachers from elementary school, 6th grade. You know, like when they are thinking about the kind of impact they want to make in the world, we need young people to say, I want to go into this work to be an educator. And right now, there are many black and brown folks who would never consider being teachers based on the experiences that they are having in school themselves, or because they don't see educators who look like them. So certainly, culturally responsive hiring is an aspiration that I believe many districts hold. The reality is we have to create a pipeline or a stream of educators who represent the diversity of the communities that our public schools serve. And that's not the case right now. And so we have a lot of work to do in that area. But Black and brown teachers are not just showing up, or worse, Black and brown teachers are given very easy pathways to teacher licensure, and they don't have the background knowledge to actually teach the students who are in front of them. They have the heart, they have the desire, they have the passion for it, but have not been adequately prepared. You can't just randomly show up off the street. Not saying that Black and brown teachers do this, but as a trained educator, like, you can't just show up and say, I'm going to teach you how to read. Like, you actually got to know how to teach a kid how to read. And if we aren't expecting or creating the conditions in which a diverse workforce has access to those types of programs, we bring in ill-prepared but very passionate educators, and then evaluate them as ineffective, and then push them out or shuffle them around or disenfranchise them within a system until they opt out and say, I actually could go work at a call center or somewhere else and not have to be bothered in this environment, or worse, have my expertise and my professionalism reduced to managing behavior instead of actually teaching kids.
And if I can just tag on there to the points that Dr. Coleman made, when you talk about having culturally responsive teachers in the classroom, let's not limit that to race. Too often, that's what we do. We say, okay, I have X number of Black teachers, X number of Hispanic teachers, X number of Asian, and therefore we're okay. Cultural responsiveness also means, do you represent the morals, the values, the beliefs of the people that you're representing as well? One of the most important teachers in my life, I did not know this until relatively recently, 30 years after high school, but he was trained in the church that I attended as a child. And so that there was a connection that he and I always had, but it was unspoken and we didn't know what it was. But I would give him more credit than any of my other teachers for helping get me where I needed to go. And so when you talk about cultural responsiveness, that's not limited to male, female, Black, white. Let's think about all the things that make people people and ensure there's equitable representation in our classrooms. And just one other thing really quick, Dr. Coleman made an important point. Yes, too many Black and brown teachers are not appropriately certified. However, there are workarounds to that we should be discussing to help ensure that there are more Black and brown teachers in classrooms.
So it's funny because I wanted to talk about the certification process, especially in terms of CTE. They make it extremely difficult, and the Department of Education even had to say, all right, we need to change these regulations on it, because I can't get teachers. I'll give you an example. I had a teacher, an African-American teacher who was teaching college, and then I needed them to teach CTE, but they couldn't get a CTE cert with the Department of Education, but they're teaching the same content on the college level. So those type of things, and along with the pay disparity. So if I want someone to come from career industry, and then I want to give them $70,000 or $60,000 and make them be entry level when they could make more than that, it's hard for you to get somebody, especially if I'm doing something like a health science where they got a nursing background and they used to making a certain amount of money. So if you want to attract people, you got to pay them.
Just from the responses you guys to that comment there in the chat, what I was thinking, and and please correct me because I'm probably going to be missing something, but I was thinking how important it is, to have teachers that look like the students. and not putting so much of an emphasis, true enough, on what's Black, brown, Asian, Hispanic, Latino, however they got all these different categories. But what I'm thinking is that when you have teachers that are qualified and they can get qualified results, normally, as Troy was speaking, those are the teachers in most case scenario, depending upon the area and region of the country you're in, that don't never get hired. How does that change?
So, having hired hundreds of teachers throughout my career, I can tell you that starting with establishing the criteria that we actually need would be a nice place. You know, the hiring protocols that are in place today are almost identical to the hiring practices that were in place when I started my career in education 27 years ago. There has been minimal adaptation to the shifting needs of our communities and our students. So I think starting with developing a profile of what a successful teacher is where I would begin, and then making sure you're actually hiring for that.
I agree with that. I also would say we need programs and opportunities while students are still in the pre-K-12 structure so that they can begin seeing themselves as educators. I think the seed has to be planted. And I want to speak specifically for Black educators. And certainly this is not, what I'm about to say is not exclusive to Black folks, but I'm a Black man and I'm a Black male educator, so I need to make sure that I say this. I think all kids need to see Black folks in a role as teachers and as educational leaders, whether they're white, Hispanic, whatever. Like I think that there is often an assumption placed on Black intelligence, and it's often because the keepers and the distributors and the facilitators of knowledge in so many instances are not Black. And I don't have to, we all know the research, I don't need to quote it, what percentage of our educators are Black, and especially Black men. And so I think, especially in this programs out there, Call Me Mister is doing really great work. And I want to make sure to shout them out and lift them up, where they're working to overcome that narrative. Because for me, and I was a dean of students, so I'm also going to say, as a former dean of students, but immediately as somebody who loved teaching social studies, loved teaching literacy, I was also really good at building relationships with students. But immediately, for many folks that went to, oh, he would make a great disciplinarian, and so like, let's make him the dean. And we got to challenge that narrative. Like we need Black educators in the classrooms, and they can't be fast tracked into the disciplinarian roles. And certainly there are benefits to that. I mean, it creates a pathway to administration and leadership. But again, that produces a lot of Black men who become administrators who don't have the educational chops to focus on curriculum instruction and assessment, as Dr. Brown talked about, because they were so quickly fast tracked into discipline that they never learned how to facilitate or coordinate a highly effective system around curriculum instruction and assessment.
Dr. Brown, I have a two-part question for you here in the chat. I'll put it on the screen. This first part, Dr. Brown, do the white majorities operating in these systems actually see race the way you describe? Or are they still functioning within the traditional patterns these institutions were built on? The second part to that question is, it hasn't changed in nearly 30 years. Where is the progress?
So the first question is an interesting one, because I don't think two people agree on what race is and what it looks like. So to look at an entire group of people and ask, do they see it the same way? The answer is probably no. You know, the issue of race is an interesting one, because in this society, we are all guilty of having implicit bias. We consume the same media. We exist in the same spaces. We all hold anti-Blackness somewhere in our hearts, no matter whether we want to admit it or not. There's anti-women behaviors, things along those lines that people believe unknowingly, and sometimes it shows in their behavior. So when you talk about white people's perceptions of race and whether it's similar to mine or not, I don't think I would limit it to, do white people or Black people see it that way? I would say that there are people who see race the way I do, and there are people who don't. And as far as the other question about where there has been real progress in education, I struggle with that question on a regular basis. If you look at the data for African American students has not changed that much in the time that I've been in education. There are more Black educators, there's more research, there are more Black doctorates out there, but the outcomes for our young people have not drastically changed. The school experience hasn't changed very much. You know, when you go to back to school night, oftentimes desks are still in rows. Chalkboards have been replaced with dry erase boards, but that's about it. You know, the routine of the school, the content areas, very little has changed in education because there's very little appetite to do what it takes to effectively meet the needs of our students.
Well, that is definitely, I gotta say, that gave me a lot to think about. And I definitely appreciate those questions as well as those answers because I think there's a lot that can be made progressively when we just talk about education in general. But in particular, for those in underserved and marginalized communities, I think there are more variables that go to that can be added to this to maybe make it systematically better. I'm not sure exactly. I'm not in the system, but just read on the outside and just reading and understanding. I think that there's a lot that can make this a whole lot better.
Well, if I could real quick, Mr. King, you know, Dr. Coleman brought up an important point about teachers, growing teachers from when they're young children, right? There's a program in New York. There's a program in New York State called Today's Students, Tomorrow's Teachers. And a large number of those young people eventually become teachers. And so the reason why I wanted to highlight that is if you look at who goes into education, most often it's people who were successful in school. Why would they change something that they were successful in? You know, people like Mr. Long, who said that he did not succeed in school the way that people expected him to. Myself, I was a classic underachiever. I work outside the box. And I think that's what it takes in order to effectively change education is you have to bring in different mindsets and different kinds of people who become educators.
I like that. Mr. Long, you said, well, there's a persistent perception in education culture that CTE is a track for students who couldn't make it academically, a lesser tier. How do you confront that perception, and what does it cost students when that perception goes unchallenged in school buildings?
It costs them opportunity, which is going to cost them money long term. That's point blank period. That's the easiest way to say that. But we have a marketing problem in CTE. Parents don't know. They don't see the big picture because I think it maybe even start with the guidance counselors too. The guidance counselors, they don't understand. So they're going to say the traditional way, like we've been talking about here, is to do 1, 2, 3. And that's what they're pushing on the students and not understanding the alternative ways that they have. So right now, like I make a lot of posts on my social media stuff where I'm showing how much money the plumbers and electricians can make, especially if they're in the area with the AI data centers. So you got the AI data centers and people are like, oh, they're taking jobs, but you're gonna need water, you're gonna need HVAC, and you're gonna need electricity. Those guys are gonna make money hand over foot servicing that data center. So we need to make sure our students that look like us have a seat at that table. Because what I'm finding is that now a lot of people that don't look like us are making sure their kids are in CTE pathways because that's where the money is. And you know, and I talked about this before, Mr. King, that what they say, the CTE is the new millionaire class as per the Wall Street Journal. It's money there to be made. So why would we not have a seat at the table? And in addition to that, the articulation agreements that we have to have, the students are still getting college credits that I have to pay for. So that's actually free credits. So why would you not take the opportunity to get free credits? You know, I mentioned earlier, 44 credits for welding. Those kids do nothing but come in and do what they, their schoolwork and do their welding. And then at the end, they get an articulation agreement for 44 credits. Why, as a parent, you not take advantage of that? And you don't have to pay for it. So, it's just a lack of understanding, and it's a bigger lack of marketing. Most districts should market these programs and market what they offer, but then that'll go against the traditional college route, and they got to make sure that they say college and career, not just college readiness.
Mr. Long, let me ask this question because again, not knowing everything, but it sounds like if you could actually make better arrangements and have better communications with the parents, that the parents play a major part in basically helping to build the CTE program along with their students. Is there a problem there?
Um, yes and no. So the parents do play a part, but the parents are going to side with the school 9 times out of 10 because they don't understand. If a guidance counselor call them and tell them, all right, your child is really smart and talented academically, they need to be doing on this college track. But guess what? CTE has these college track too. We have engineering, STEM, all those things that you could get the same stuff and get the credentials, job placements, and college credit. So why not add onto that? Like, so in New Jersey here, the top schools have a CTE component to it. So if you look at our number 1, 2, 3, they have a CTE component to it. So why not add CTE to that high level academic pathway that you have so you could add more to it? Not, let's stop doing status quo. Oh, we got a really good school. We're sending them to college. That's it. That's the end of the story. Well, how we move the needle to get more?
Can I say amen to that? Is that cool? All right.
Well, you can chime in if you like.
That's all I have to say was amen. Yep.
Well, so, now I want to ask this question for each of you because, again, this may sound kind of dumb and stupid, but I want to ask this question. It sounds like you guys are in in different regions, right, of the country. And so I just want to ask this question. Does it sound feasible to have an education system that supposedly is going to be serving all students around the country? Or because states are different and they want to do things different because, some states might not want so much education or so forth, is it okay for states to change that and say, well, I just want to make up my own system? Do you think a one school system for everybody that's got one curriculum that fits all? Do you think that works?
That was why Common Core failed. Common Core was all about creating uniform standards across the 50 states. And what they did at the time was they said, 80% of the standards must be the same, but you have freedom for 20%. Schools are supposed to be community-based and reflective of the needs and wants of the school community, and I think that the most successful schools are the schools who do that. The schools that struggle are the ones that lack identity, that try to be vanilla in their approach, and they don't really fulfill the mission of the students that are in front of them. So I'm a big believer in community schools and decentralizing.
Similar to what Dr. Brown said, I've already talked about what I believe as far as the schools belong to the community that they serve, and the communities that they serve should be integral leaders in deciding how that school functions. I also think we have to be aware of, if we had a universal national education system, who would be selected as the leader for that? And would that person, look at our current, I don't want to get anybody in trouble. I don't care. Our
Yes.
our current leads are U.S. Department of Education. So if we were to select individuals who at a national level, would they have and not that Linda McMahon is not good for somebody somewhere. But when I think about what many districts and communities need, that type of leadership is missing the mark on what communities might say we value and is important to us. So I do think it's important that leadership and representation that has their finger on the pulse for what that community needs is important. And when you have a national model where a board or one person is selected, that's usually not based on their ability to represent and reflect what individual communities need, it becomes a political position. And and not that education isn't political, it is, but when it's national or federal politics at play, there's a whole lot of folks in urban communities and rural communities who get left out of that framework. And we see that happening right now.
Yes, sir. And I'll just add this one little thing. What did we teach teachers to do? We don't teach them to teach every kid the same.
Right.
So how can we do that on a whole level? So, I mean, it's just common sense. We can't do that.
Dr. Brown, you use Kendall's TAUB, TAUB, and Kendall's W, and single regression analysis in your research.
Mhm.
Why did the rigor of the methodology matter to you? And what does it mean for practitioners in buildings who are skeptical of research that doesn't apply to their school?
So the rigor of my dissertation was necessary because there is a school in White Plains, New York that was designed around my research. White Plains Middle School created a sixth grade only campus where curriculum instruction and assessment was the priority, and preparing students for their secondary career is what they do in that sixth grade only school. So that was part of the reason why the rigor had to be there in my study, because there were thousands of children whose lives were going to be directly impacted by what I learned. The other part of this too, when people think that, if I heard you correctly, some people may think this does not apply to their school settings. Yeah, they're wrong. Okay. The business of teaching and learning is everybody's business. And how you go about doing that should be to ensure that you understand where your students are, and more importantly, where you need to get them to be, and that you develop an appropriate plan to ensure that every student gets there. There was a question before about proficiency rates. And, some people are like, oh, 80% is good enough. Well, name the 20% of kids that you're okay with failing. And if your child fell in that failing group, would you still say that 80% was an acceptable number? So the idea that every child is still not having their needs met means that the findings from my research are absolutely relevant to virtually every school setting in this country.
Dr. Coleman, tell us about the founding of Read More Oshkosh. Who did you see being left out of the existing literacy infrastructure in Oshkosh? And what was the specific need that made you decide the community needed something new?
Yeah, I mean, really, all students were being left out of what was good for reading instruction. Not to suggest that nobody who lives in Oshkosh can read and access text, but students across all demographics, I'll put it that way, were being left out. And so there were parents across socioeconomic, linguistic diversity, racial diversity, ability, all of that, who were saying, like, my kid is, and this is a national story as well, where just the way we were teaching reading, the way many students are reading less books, less novels at this time. So for me, it was, or if they were reading, it was because it's forced on them at school and not necessarily reading for enjoyment or reading for information. And so for me, it was important to increase the access that readers of all ages have to text, because Read More serves readers of all ages. And what we do is we raise money and provide books at no cost to readers of all ages, as well as we organize community organizations within our city who are focused on reading literacy. You have some organizations who are focused on adults who are developing literacy skills, folks who are immigrants or new to our country who are learning to read, write, and speak in English, young readers who are school age, babies who are new in the world, and their parents are trying to figure out, how do I develop a regimen or routine where they're exposed to literacy and text. And there was a gap missing where there was a coordinated effort to bring all of those organizations together, as well as make reading resources free and accessible to our community. And so it was a community conversation where we talked about our nation's literacy crisis, as well as what that looks like here locally. And I asked the group of people there, what would a strategy or a solution look like? Because as I mentioned earlier, it is not enough to just critique a situation, or we got to be able to bring a solution. And out of that, individuals chimed in and said we could have a community-wide strategy to promote the joy and the love of reading, as well as make reading resources available. And why not just do that here in Oshkosh? I said, yeah, why not? Let's do it. And that was how that came out. It was talking to a group of leaders who were compelled by the presentation we shared, and a group of folks who believed that this literacy crisis is solvable. Now, there are some places and they don't believe it's solvable, or they believe it's the school system's job to solve it.
Right.
But this group said, no, this is a community problem, and it needs a community solution. And so let's come together as a community to support readers of all ages to address this issue. And I'm happy to say the community has embraced this model, and I hope that communities across our nation ask the same question: what can we as a community do to be a more literate community?
Dr. Brown, I'm sure that this question here in the chat is for you. I'm going to put this on the screen. It says Amendment 10 fueled the tensions leading to the Civil War. Its push for local control is powerful, but when racial demographics enter the equation, that same decentralization can become dangerous.
I don't agree. And so, for those who don't know, Amendment 10 said that whatever is not law in the federal government is up to the states. And commonly we refer to that as states' rights. When this country was founded, it was founded as individuals, countries coming together because they shared a cause, they shared a purpose, they shared a set of beliefs. However, there are 50 states for a reason. Hawaii is not the same as Maine, and nor should it be. It is the diversity amongst our states that creates, I think, a beautiful fabric that can allow this country to fulfill its potential. With that having been said, there are vehicles in place to ensure that decentralized schools are successful, and that comes in the form of elected boards of education. Now, unfortunately, we find that the lowest participation rates in most elections are for those small local elections like boards of education. Mount Vernon was a city of 80,000 people, and we routinely had less than 2,000 people who cast votes when it came to the school. That is local control. If people are choosing not to participate in those elections, then they're choosing not to have influence over their school. But I think that we have to take a look at the vehicles that are in place to ensure that schools can be successful and make sure we're appropriately utilizing them.
Mr. Long, you successfully secured New Jersey's Expanding Career Pathways in Artificial Intelligence grant. Walk us through how you made that happen and why AI specifically is the right frontier for CTE equity argument right now.
Well, the reason we went after it because we a technical school. So how can I not be a technical school and not go for something like this? We wanted to be at the forefront and the cutting edge of technology, and there's so many misconceptions with AI. We wanted to kind of lay the foundation for the state of New Jersey, which is a beautiful thing. That when you talk about that, you have to talk about the stuff that we did in our district. So that was one of the reasons. But again, we had so many problems internally with AI. We wanted to create a pathway, get college credit so we can now explain it better to students so we can have more socially responsible users. But as you see, a lot of with education now we're kind of going backwards because they're so scared of technology. We're going back to the cell phone bans and this. So they're not quite sure how to handle everything. So I was just blessed in a situation that I had great partners available to me. I worked with the college in New Jersey, and we have it up on like the whole pathway that I wrote is up on their website. So it's free. You just have to have an articulation agreement with them. You get 12 college credits for taking the 4 classes. So it was all about providing more access. And I thought bigger picture, like, hey, this is something that everyone in the entire state of New Jersey could benefit from. So.
Dr. Coleman, Read More Oshkosh was built specifically for the Black immigrant and refugee students, 3 communities with 3 different relationships to language, literacy, and the American educational system. How do you build one initiative that actually speaks to and serves all 3 without flattening the distinctions between them?
Yeah, actually, it's important that I state there is an organization that I work with that targets its focus on Black and Brown readers, and that is SAPO. Read More is a universal community-wide program that intends to serve readers of all ages across all demographics and identities. So am a part of a lot of many literacy efforts here in Oshkosh. But Read More, for example, is focused specifically on, or focused broadly on readers of all ages across all identities and demographics. There is an organization that I work with and teach in, and this is specifically around Black and Brown immigrant and refugee youth here in the city of Oshkosh. To answer that question about how do I ensure that it doesn't become flattened, is it's honoring student voice and student perspective. So students get to decide what that program is, the books we read, how we create experiences, the snacks we eat, the setup of the room. It is students are at the center of all of that. And so I think the way we keep it from becoming decentralized is we center student perspective and student voice in and how we function and how we serve the students who are in that program.
Dr. Brown, middle school has been called the Bermuda Triangle of education, the place where engaged, curious fifth graders disappear and resurface as disengaged, disconnected eighth graders. As someone who lives and breathes middle school every day, why does this keep happening, and what does a building need to do differently to break that pattern?
So I want to go back to something that Dr. Coleman mentioned earlier about certification. In New York, for example, there's K through 12 certification, there's 7 through 12 certification, and then there's K through 6 certification. There are very few content areas that are certified 5 through 9. When you're between the ages of 10 and 14 years old, you're undergoing the most rapid growth you will experience in your life, other than between 0 and 3. Yet, we do not ensure that there are educators who are specifically trained to teach these young adolescents. It drives me crazy. An 11-year-old has very specific needs, and you can't assume that those needs are going to be met by the fact that you just have a teacher in front of the class. Making sure that those needs of the students are met ensures that you have people who want to work with young adolescents, and not everyone does, nor should they be forced to do so. The second thing is you have to make sure those teachers are appropriately trained to meet the needs of young adolescents, and understand that, some girls are going to enter in roller skates and leave in high heels. It's a very different experience when you're between 10 and 14 years old. And I think the lack of specialization, the lack of certification, the lack of focus on middle school is why it has become a Bermuda Triangle. It is a place where many children go to get lost. And I remember when I was a student in middle school, I saw former good students just kind of fall off of the radar in middle school. And I saw it as an educator as well, that there were students who were overlooked in other areas, but because of our specific focus on 6th grade, we were able to capture those students. But again, it was very intentional on our part. But for most middle schools, there is a lack of intentionality there.
Wow. Mr. Long, you talked about CTE as a vehicle for generational wealth. Make that argument explicitly. How does a CTE pathway in 25 and beyond actually translate into the kind of financial and professional stability that changes the trajectory of a family, not just an individual?
It removes the debt barrier. So, for instance, with the price of college going through the roof, so like the school I went to cost me $20,000, and now it costs $60,000. So let's say you got a $60,000 school for a year. So now 4 years times 60. You do the math on that. What kind of job are you going to get to pay off that debt? Most of the time, you're going to have an entry-level job, $45,000, $50,000. So you're like this in terms of your salary and your debt. By the time you break even, you're 35, maybe 40. You just broke even. Now with the CTE pathways, we're paying for your college, we're paying for your credentials, and a lot of times these employers are going to send you back to school to get more education. So you have zero debt, and you're making the $60,000. And you keep going up, you keep going up, you keep going up. That changed the narrative because the debt went down. So we're kind of removing the debt by changing the focus of it. We're still getting you college credits, we're still getting you that, but we're getting you real world experience, we're getting you credentials, we're getting you things of that nature that can help you move along faster in your career, minus the debt.
Okay. Dr. Coleman, you were named Wisconsin's most influential Black leader in 2023, Wisconsin Man of Excellence in 2024, and Oshkosh People of the Year in 2024. How do you hold honors like those while still operating with an urgency when urgency is what the work demands?
I believe in the power of coalitions. I believe in the power of building community to solve problems. And so I think some of those recognitions around influence and excellence and being a person of the year came from people noticing that. And I ascribe to this African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I believe in this, like we got to go together. And so for me, is being able to bring people together to help solve problems. And so certainly there are consequences to bringing people together and solving problems. And consequences can be good or bad. But I think Dr. Brown's point around people have different perspectives. And so what looks like a problem that is racial or class oriented or gender oriented might be seen differently depending on who's in the room, who's at the table, and what their lived experiences are. For me, it's been helpful to help folks focus on a solution instead of coming together to have debate. And debate is healthy, but I'm not interested in using time to debate things. I'm interested in solving problems. And so people see me as a problem solver, as a truth teller, and also like I like my job, but I am willing to lead in ways that might cost me my job. I'm willing to say things that might cost me my job, and I think that these are necessary aspects of leadership. And I think people see that as courage. People see that as tenacity. And so those are values that I aspire to lead with on a daily basis, being courageous to tell the truth, being courageous to listen to things that I may not want to hear, being courageous to put myself in spaces that might be uncomfortable or that might be unfamiliar for the purpose of arriving at solutions that improves the educational landscape of this state. And so that's what I'm serious about. And I'll have to just qualify in there that, again, I'm not waiting until I get to be a certain age or I have a certain credential or I'm respected by a certain echelon of people. My ideas, my energy, my passion for this work is just as valid right now as it was when I started this work as a paraprofessional. And I lead in that regard.
Okay. Dr. Brown, there's an ongoing debate in education about grade configuration, whether K-8 schools serve young adolescents better than traditional 6 to 8 middle school models. Where do you stand on that debate, and what does the research actually say that?
Where I stand on that debate is that K through 8 schools are harmful to children in most settings. The reason why is that the developmental appropriateness of kindergartners being amongst 14 years old is just not there. When I was a principal of a K-8 school, I had students who came to school with ankle bracelets on, and we're trying to integrate them into an environment where we have students who are learning to read. Additionally, what you have in K-8 schools is you often don't have teachers who are certified in specific content areas that allow them to be the experts that students need at the secondary level. Often in K-8 settings, the teachers who teach the middle school grades are common branch teachers or elementary certified teachers, and they are not able to provide that experience that students need. Finally, the environment, the physical environment, is also not conducive to larger children in many cases, causing them to not be able to participate in things like interscholastic athletics, et cetera. You know, the research is pretty clear that the grade configuration doesn't matter for outcome, but it's what you provide in that configuration that truly does. I think people who have been in positions to make decisions around staffing would tell you you're much better able to provide certified staff in a secondary setting than you are in an elementary setting.
So is it your findings, or is it that in your opinion that when they have that 6 through 8 model, that it's one that supposedly is like just a little difference between 6 and 8 that doesn't really actually help that student to captivate his or her best as to what they can be as a student? and that being separate in the 8th grade model itself makes them all the student they could be and prepare them for the next level?
Well, when you talk about what happens in the grades, that's much more important than how they're actually configured, right? And so we talked before about the significance of being intentional about educating students in grade 6. And what I would tell you is, and this is from my lived experience in Mount Vernon, it was a school district, and I mentioned before about the low proficiency rates we had for our students. But 70% of my students passed a high school assessment before they graduated 8th grade. The reason why they were able to do that was because in 6th grade, we made sure those students knew that they were valued. We made sure they had a rigorous experience every single day. Every student knew when they saw me, the first question I was going to ask them is, what book are you reading? Where is your book? Right? That was an expectation that we had. And by establishing that for those students in 6th grade, they then knew what was expected of them as they entered the more accountable section of their academic career when it's time to earn high school credits. I try to be thoughtful about saying that when you're in middle school, you're not preparing students for high school. That's often what people say. What you're doing in middle school is making the most of the experience that they have there so that they can experience success when they get to high school. But middle school is about figuring out who you are, how you exist in this space, how you learn, and what you need to do in order to excel as a student. It's not about just being prepared for high school.
So, my last question to that is, so what part do the parents play in that? Because don't they have a part in that to actually help those kids as well?
Absolutely. Parents are children's first teacher. However, we cannot limit the potential of children by what their parents will or won't do for them. Too often, we find that school systems will underinvest in children based upon the participation of their parents. In large school districts like Philadelphia, in the schools where the parents were more active, those schools had what they needed. In the schools where the parents were less active, those schools did not have what they need. So I would say that it's incumbent upon us as educators not to make decisions about whether parents are or are not involved, but we should be making decisions about what we know is right and best for children.
Okay. Mr. Long, you've spoken about restoring hope for students who have been written off by traditional education. Describe who that student is demographically, academically, emotionally, and tell us what it looks like when CTE actually reaches them.
So I like to say it's the urban and rural student that had all these opportunities, but they couldn't do it because they got all these issues that they dealing with at home or things of that nature that teachers may not know. They may not understand. So they write them off as, oh, this kid can't do this or this kid can't do that. I spoke earlier about, you can't teach a kid anything if they're hungry.
Right.
If the kid doesn't have technology because they live in a certain, so it's a lot of barriers to success that these kids face with. And once we figure that out and address it and try to find something that engages them, so some kids can't even stay after school because they got to get a job, because their family needs that money that they got to bring in. So a lot of the times the teachers, and this goes back to the conversation we had earlier when you talk about certain kind of teachers. If the teacher's not invested in the community, they're not invested in the school, they're not going to be invested in that student. You learn from who you respect and who you like. I had students that would run through a brick wall for me. I hate to say that when they had us doing discipline, because we all been there, that I had some of the ankle bracelets, I had the car, all that stuff, and they respected me because I took the time to find out what was valuable to them. And you listen to them. A lot of times these adults are not listening to students. We're being very we're taking what they say with a grain of salt and we just keep it moving. And once kids know you're not there for them, they're never going to respect you. And then when you can reach those kids that no one else can reach because you just listen, that means a lot. Now you can provide them with the options and the opportunities. Like, hey, you may want to be interested in this. You may want to take a look at that. And they will listen to you because now they trust you. So once you establish trust with a kid, there's a lot you could do.
Dr. Coleman, you've spoken at the National School Boards Association and Harvard's Achievement Opportunity Collaborative. When you step into rooms like those, what is the one thing you most want decision makers to walk away with understanding that they didn't walk in with?
I think it's really just understanding the power to be able to prove things. I think a lot of decision makers and leaders accept the status quo um, as as final word. And I think for me is I want leaders, even if they don't have the formal title as leader, but I think anybody who serves in a space has some leadership responsibility. And for me, it's helping them understand why they are there in that space. As I talked about earlier, those leaders who were really able to make a difference and being able to increase access to opportunity for students, it was because they believed they had a moral and a spiritual calling and a purpose on this earth that they had to fulfill before they leave this earth. And I want leaders in those spaces to understand that the capacity they serve in is not so that they can get a check at the end of every 2 weeks or on the first and the 15th. There is an assignment that you are on, and we do not have an infinite amount of time to complete that assignment. So when you go back to your setting where you serve, what are you prepared to do so that your being there matters? And I know that we live in a time right now where many educators are recognizing like, oh, I'm replaceable. Like they could, if I got fired today, or if I won the lottery today, or if I died today, my position will be posted tomorrow, and that's true. But hopefully not tomorrow, but maybe they give it some time. But the reality is, um, there's only one Mr. Long, there's only one Dr. Brown, there's only one Dr. Coleman, and there is a reason why we are in the systems we're in or in the spaces we're in, and while we're there, I believe to my core that the reason is to make an impact and specifically impact toward progress. And so I want educators to be reflective on if my time to serve in this environment ended tomorrow, did I leave it better than I found it? And if not, what am I prepared to do so that that becomes my truth?
Let me ask you this: and some of those galas where you're speaking, and you have those leaders there. How many of those leaders actually listen, comprehend, and understand what you're saying? Because I know all of them don't.
I, I hope all of them do. But you know what I think, and I believe that this was who I was as a classroom teacher as well. This is who I was when I was a minister. The seed is planted. So even if I believe that the spoken word has so much power, whether we realize it in that moment or not. And so if they walk away from that setting and believe that they've gotten nothing, in my mind, the seed is planted. And maybe it didn't produce anything in that moment, but I just have to believe that words have power. And as I'm sharing my words and sharing what was given to me to provide in that space, that it will produce something tangible, if not in the immediate, maybe later on. And I have had many people reach out to me over the years and say, I was at this event that you spoke at last year, or a couple months ago, or a few weeks ago, and I just encountered something that reminded me of something you said. Like, can we talk a little bit about, So the seed is planted, and I even if people disagree with what I say in that moment, they often come back and say, at that time, I wasn't trying to hear what you were saying. Like I didn't agree, but I encountered this situation, and what you said came back to my mind and resonated with me. And so I approach spaces where maybe what I'm saying is not relevant in that moment to everybody in that room. But I do believe that the power that exists within the spoken word, it will resonate and it will click with most people at some point, even if it's not in the immediate.
Dr. Brown, you've established that dropout risk can be identified as early as sixth grade. What are the specific indicators a middle school principal should be looking for, and what is the appropriate response when those indications appear?
So there's three things that you can take a look at, and any one of these things decreases the chance of a student graduating on time from high school. Missing 10% or more of your school days, failing one or more classes, or being suspended once or more. What should be done in those cases is that there should be intense interventions put in place to help those students correct the issues that are causing them to fall in one of those areas. There's a student I was thinking of when I went to Mount Vernon from White Plains. I was asked to replicate the sixth grade, in Mount Vernon that we had in White Plains. And by doing so, we were able to catch students a little bit earlier than we would have in terms of some of the social issues that they were getting involved with older students. Because of that, we had the right adults in place to provide those supports for students. So I had a young lady who was a fighter, and she would fight anyone over anything. And that caused her to miss time from school. So what did she get? She had a mentor teacher that 10 years later, they're still in touch and still communicating with each other on a regular basis. I had another student who was struggling mightily academically. What did we do? We opened up our school on Saturdays, 13 Saturdays out of the school year, to provide extra education for students who weren't getting enough during the course of the school day. When that wasn't sufficient, we created something called Homework Zone, which was one-on-one tutoring that occurred after school. What we did, Charles, is we met the students where they were at in every case in which we could, and that made a big difference in terms of whether they were successful or not.
Mr. Long, if CTE were fully funded, fully staffed with cultural competent educators, and fully integrated into every urban school district in America, what would change first? And what will we see within 5 years that we don't see today?
The community would change. So I always call it outsourcing. We go to college, we leave our communities behind. Not 9 times out of 10. Most people, you go to college, you move away, you find a new group of people, you kind of gravitate to those people. I'm a product of it. I was born and raised in Trenton. I went to college somewhere else. It took me 20 something years before I came back and worked in that area. I still have family there, but I just found other areas where I found that was interesting, et cetera, et cetera. But with CTE, you don't have to leave. Now the money stays home. The businesses drive because the money is there for them. A lot of times, like especially what happened with COVID, our downtown areas, a lot of those places went out of business because now the state employees, they can work from home, et cetera, et cetera. The money's not coming in to keep these businesses afloat. But with the CTE, everyone has money. They're keeping the money locally. So now your local businesses thrive, everything. So it changes the narrative. So guess what else is going to happen? When people have money now, it's less crime to tend to happen as well. So it impacts your community on a whole. People need to see the bigger picture of it. That's why I fight for CTE in urban areas and rural areas, because it's a game changer. It will put money where money belongs, in the community.
So, do you honestly think that that this program, if it was put universally around the country in every school, do you think it would take some time for that to be integrated, or do you think of the knowledge of it already being there and just some systems not using it, that they're going to be able to grasp that system and just move forward?
You can grasp it and move forward, but you got to have the right people leading it. And as I said, that we have a leadership problem because a lot of people don't understand it. So most comprehensive schools have some form of CTE, and they may not even be calling it that, or they may not be doing the paperwork properly because it's too much paperwork. I met with someone today. They received $17,000 from Perkins. It's like, man, they make me jump through hoops for this $17,000. It's almost not worth it. I could get it from another source and save my time, which is true. Like I go back and forth with the Department of Education all the time over nitpicking stuff. Like, oh, take out academic, take out a word, and they send you your grant back. So removing these barriers and making it easier for people to do these things will help out a lot as well. But most of it is because people don't understand. So they're not pushing what they have right in front of them. A lot of places have it set up and they're just not calling it that because there's the paperwork that they don't want to do.
So, as you understand this program and know of it from the national perspective, where is its prominence primarily designed to be? Because I know that there are different areas that use it. What areas are you seeing using CTE more than others?
Well, what happened is most states now have tech centers. So,
Okay.
and that's causing problems with a lot of the comprehensive local schools. So, we're taking kids from this high school, that high school, we have like full-time and share time. So when I get a full-time kid, that's monies that could have been in that local community. It's still in the county, but it's now coming to me. Or if I have a share time, we're splitting that kid 50-50, and they're still got to pay for transportation. So it's a lot of funding issues that goes along with that. But every state is doing that in a certain way, but like I said, it's hurting those who don't understand it. So like if you can't have a similar program as me and I got the better infrastructure, like I got this brand new building, and I'm teaching welding, I got the stuff, and you're teaching it in theory, and my kids getting the hands-on, they're going to send the kid to me because it makes more sense. So we have to make sure that all the comprehensive schools have the the infrastructures and the systems in place to service the kids so they can want to go there and stay there.
Let me say this to you. I'm gonna tell you the reason why I asked you that last question is because, like, I'm here in Georgia, and I know primarily throughout the southeastern area, throughout the South primarily. Honestly, when I think about this program, when we first had you on the show, I'm thinking, like, why am I not hearing about this being in this particular area? Because it would work perfectly. But the school systems, I think, may have some parts of this, in whatever particular state, they may have some part of this, and they may call it something else, but they do some of the things that you mentioned that you guys do in New Jersey. Why would you think the presence, though, of that program is not so prominent in so many areas?
Well, like I said it before, it's certain things that the schools have to adhere to. Like they're worried about their test scores, their graduation rates, their attendance rates. They're not worried about these things because that's how they get their report card. So their report card dictates some of their funding, et cetera, et cetera. So those things come first for them. And then plus, if they don't have the right people to hire, I can't put my energy and effort into CTE when I don't have a CTE person to run it. So let me try to embed it the best I can. But while I'm focusing on the things that I'm going to get graded for, like, the board and all of those things, that's what they're looking at that superintendent about. So they want to make sure they're covering all the things that's going to, dictate their job.
Well, I just call that's a lack of accountability. They don't want to be held accountable. And the reason why they don't want to be held accountable is because, as Dr. Coleman mentioned, and Dr. Brown mentioned, the schools of the haves and the have-nots, is I can guarantee you, for the schools that they consider failing, and if they actually implemented that program, I guarantee you those schools, like most of them do anyway, would more than perform much, much better than the schools that are getting all this funding for graduation rates, which I think are not quite accurate anyway, but that's what I think.
So Mr. King, remember I told you, I said, so if you put CTE in certain schools, like these struggling schools, you put it in the beginning of the day instead of the math and English. What did it do? It improve attendance. I'm going to come to school for my favorite class, the class that I really like. That's your CTE pathway. But then it also improved test scores too across the board. So now
exactly.
your math is embedded in your CTE. Your English is embedded in your CTE. So now my content-specific vocabulary is through the roof when I'm using all these big fancy words that's in my CTE pathway. So now when I'm going to writing, those are words that's now in my wheelhouse. So they don't understand that it actually helps with all these other things, but they don't know.
Yeah, that's one that I've got to. I'll probably need to do like a little docu-series on that, because I can guarantee you, if I went around to a lot of these schools here in Georgia, I can guarantee you the answers that I'm going to get is we don't do that, and they come up with the reason why they don't. Dr. Brown, you attended the Lincoln University, the nation's oldest HBCU. How did your undergraduate experience at Lincoln shape the lens through which you lead at schools, conduct research, and think about the students who sit in front of you?
I'll try not to talk too much about my alma mater, but attending Lincoln University, not just for me, but for others, has been transformative. When you walk the campus, that Thurgood Marshall walk, that Langston Hughes walk, that the first president of Ghana and Nigeria have walked, there's some legacy there that it seeps its way into the way in which you think. What happened for me at Lincoln, Mr. Long mentioned before about being a little bit of an underachiever. I was an underachiever as an undergraduate, but when I went to Lincoln, I found my home because I found adults who were invested in me as a person. That's something in that HBCU experience that's just not present in most PWIs, which is there are adults who care about you, who will bend over backwards to make sure that you excel, and who will ensure that you never feel inferior because of the color of your skin. That training, that experience made sure that equity was always at the center of every single decision I have made as an educator. And having been a student who has struggled and having been a student who's had the privilege of, I was a Chinese major at Lincoln. How often does a young person get to go to college and major and then study in China? That was an opportunity that Lincoln University afforded me that other schools would not have. And so all of that has shaped how I interact with students. I look for the potential before I find the problem with every person that I come across in education. I look at what a person can be versus what they are, because that's how I was looked at when I came to Lincoln. They never looked at me as a finished product. They looked at me as a lump of clay that with molding and care could become greater than I was. So I've learned to put others before myself, to serve before being served, and to ensure that equity is at the center of every decision I make.
I'm going to ask this question of Dr. Coleman, and I'll make this the last question, and we'll have closing remarks from each of you guys. Dr. Coleman, what would a truly equity-centered district look like, structurally, culturally, in terms of staffing and curriculum, and how far are we from that in Wisconsin and nationally?
I think a community would have to decide that. So I think the process would be community comes together in a way that reflects the diversity across how diversity is defined, because again, that's so much deeper, as we heard earlier, than race and gender and language spoken. But I think a community has to come together and decide, how does this system make sure that it works and serves effectively all members of this school district. And in many instances, that's not how school districts define its priorities or strategies. And so it's either the administrators making that decision or the school board making that decision. And as we know, school boards are often elected by a very small percentage of folks who are participating in that process. So I think equity means that schools reflect the values and the priorities of the community, and they have a way to participate, weigh in, and monitor and hold that system accountable for serving the students and the staff and the families who are connected to that system. And so I think school districts would benefit from having a commitment and a mission for centering the community's voice beyond status quo traditional ways, showing up to a listening session at a board meeting. Like, that's not going to cut it. Or filling out a survey. Like, that's not going to cut it. We need more involved in substantive ways to center the community's voice in the school systems that serve that community. So I think when that happens, however that happens, we would have a more equity-centered set of systems across our nation.
So in closing, I would love to get closing remarks from each of you guys. If there's some words of wisdom and encouragement that you'd like to have for the audience, have them connect with you guys via your social media, websites, or anything in particular, how to buy your books, whatever. If you guys could please do that, I'd appreciate it. I want to start with you, Mr. Long.
Thank you for that. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it always. I love to talk education. I learned some new things today from the gentleman on the panel, so I appreciate the knowledge that you guys are sharing. We can't do this thing in silos, and everything we do is for the community that we serve. And we're trying to help the people that look like us. So this is a very powerful venue, and I'm thankful to be here. I have a lot of things that I do that I try to give back. Ms. King, I started my education summit. I did my first summit last year in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I'm doing another one this year. So if you can look me up online, Lead Education Summit. but I'm taking it a step further, and I'm happy to announce, and I'll have it come out in the next week or so, that I'm doing an education gala where I'm giving out $10,000 scholarships for CTE students to help them with supplies and things of that nature. So that will be coming out shortly, but I'm trying to give back and change the narrative for urban and rural education. So Lead Education Summer, you can see the stuff that I'm doing. I'm on LinkedIn and all of that stuff.
Mr. Brown.
So thank you for having me today, gentlemen. It was nice to learn from you this evening and to contribute to this important conversation. For those who are interested in getting in touch with me, you can do so through LinkedIn or through our company's website, catalyst-edu.com. And what I would say as we get ready to wrap up is that get off of the sidelines and get involved. Ask questions. Support the people who are actually out there making a difference by asking them how you can help. You know, we come to quick conclusions about what is or what isn't working in schools, but the bottom line is that those educators who are out on the front lines deserve our complete support. And we can do that by asking questions, beginning with, how can I support you while you support our young people?
Coleman.
Again, I want to just thank Mr. Long, Dr. Brown, Brother King, Mr. King, for setting up this opportunity for us to have this conversation. It's an honor to be here with you all, honored to just learn from and engage with sharp minds who share a passion for certainly for education, but more importantly for the progress of our nation. I would also go on to say that reading and literacy is not exclusive to what we do in schools. That reading and literacy has an important place, I believe, in the lives of every human being. And so I would ask folks to find ways to consume, promote, and enjoy reading in ways that make the most sense for you, whether if that's poetry, if it's historic content, if it's writing, if it's listening to audiobooks, but find ways to integrate literacy into your routine. Then I would also say, if you want to get in touch with me, certainly check out readmoreoshkosh.com, and then also I'm on LinkedIn at Sam Coleman, PhD.
Well, I want to thank each of you guys for being here. I'm going to close with a monologue, and I would appreciate if you guys can hang around for a few minutes after I close the show. I want to thank each and every individual that's been here, that's watching the show, and all of you guys that have stayed and watched this entire show. Education is a really big part of our community growth, but it also adds a lot of value to families. And so, in just thinking about that as a whole, I hope there's something that each and every individual has learned, and you guys have the opportunity to at least reach out to any of these professionals to ask any questions that you may have. So let me close the show here as this work continues. Tonight, we heard things that do not leave you easily, and they shouldn't. Dr. Coleman reminded us that literacy is not just something we teach children so they can pass a reading test. Literacy is liberation. It is the mechanism through which a child learns that their story exists in this world, that their culture has a history, that their community has a produced greatness, that they themselves are capable of producing more. And he reminded us that when we strip representation from the curriculum, from the classroom, from the leadership of a school district, we're not just making an administrative choice. We're sending a message to every child in that building about what kind of future this society has reserved for them. That message has to change. Dr. Jonathan Brown showed up, and he showed us that the window is not as wide as we pretend it is. By 6th grade, by 11 years old, we can already see the indicators. The research is clear. The CIA cluster of curriculum, instruction, and assessment, when built with intentionality and interdependence, changes outcomes. But when we fail those children in what we rightly call the keystone grade, we're not just losing a school year. We're losing a life's trajectory. Dropout prevention begins in middle school. College readiness begins in middle school. We cannot afford to keep treating that moment as a bridge when it is, in fact, a foundation. And Troy Long gave us something we desperately needed: hope that is not passive, hope that is a career pathway, hope that is a classroom where what you're learning actually connects to how you're going to live. CTE is not a track for students who couldn't make it academically. It is a track that honors what every child brings: curiosity, skill, ambition, and builds a future from it. That is relevance, and relevance saves lives. So tonight I'm speaking directly to you. If you are an educator, take what you heard tonight back into your building and refuse to accept systems that fail the children in your care. If you are a parent, ask harder questions, demand more. Your child's potential is not negotiable. If you are a policymaker, stop writing policy from outside the room. Sit down with the people who were on this stage tonight. Listen before you legislate. And if you are a community member who simply loves your people, show up, share this, keep this conversation alive beyond tonight. The systems are broken, the minds are brilliant, and the work, the real work, it begins right now. I'm Charles Zachary King. This is America in Black and White, and we will see you